My 30 female husband, 32 male, is a wonderful partner, except for his obsession with our future that's destroying our present. From the outside, my husband and I seem like a perfectly happy couple. We met in college, dated through our 20s, and got married a few years ago. We've had countless adventures together traveling, trying new hobbies, meeting each other's families, and we both worked hard to build a solid life together. My husband is ambitious and driven, qualities I admire. But in the last year or so, his ambition has begun to morph into something far more intense, an obsession with achieving the perfect future. It started with a job change. He was offered a promotion in his company that came with a huge pay raise, but also required a major relocation and even more hours. We had always talked about starting a family, but suddenly he was setting timelines for when we'd reach certain financial milestones before we could even think about children. I wanted kids soon, but he insisted we wait, promising me a dream life, one where we'd be financially secure, have a big house, and where he could comfortably provide everything we'd ever need. At first, I believed him. After all, he's practical and has always made wise choices. But as time went on, it seemed like he was less focused on our relationship in the present and more on this hypothetical future. He spent hours at work and even more hours strategizing, taking courses, investing, and making future-focused plans. Our weekends turned into budget meetings and conversations about investments, goals, and timelines. Every decision we made felt like it was under a magnifying glass, dissected for its potential future impact. Last week, I suggested a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin, just a break from everything, a chance to reconnect without the future hanging over our heads. He was reluctant, mentioning how he'd lose valuable time working on his personal projects. But he finally agreed. I thought we'd have some real conversations, maybe rekindle the spark, but instead, the trip just turned into more lectures about how we could optimize our future and make the most out of the years to come. It was painful, feeling like I was losing the person I'd fallen in love with to some vision of a life that hadn't even happened yet. A few nights ago, I broke down and told him that I missed us, missed the spontaneous and carefree connection we used to have. I told him that I felt like I was being sidelined in our own relationship by some imagined version of what could be. He listened but didn't seem to understand. He told me he was doing this for us and that he couldn't see why I didn't appreciate his dedication. Now I feel caught in a dilemma. I love him deeply and know he cares about me, but I'm struggling to connect with him in the present. I don't want to lose him, but I also don't want to spend my life waiting for a future that keeps moving further away. I don't know if he'll ever understand, or if I'm being unfair for wanting him to focus on the now instead of the what if. My 27 female girlfriend, 27 female, wants me to come out on social media, but I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of visibility. My girlfriend and I met during our senior year of college and have been together for almost 5 years now. We've both worked through our own journey of self-acceptance, and while we're very comfortable with each other, our families, and our close friends, I've always been hesitant about coming out publicly. I grew up in a conservative town and have seen friends who were ostracized after coming out, so for a long time, I kept my sexuality private. When my girlfriend and I moved to the city together, I finally started to open up more. Her family was supportive and inclusive, and we began attending Pride events, meeting others in the community, and even wearing rings as a symbol of our commitment. But I've always kept my personal life separate on social media. My accounts are filled with posts about work, travel, books, nothing that hints at my relationship. My girlfriend, on the other hand, is open and proudly posts photos of us, tagging me in them and celebrating our milestones. About a month ago, she came to me and said that she felt hurt by the fact that I haven't come out online, especially since we're so open in every other part of our lives. She said she felt like I was hiding her, like I wasn't proud of our relationship. That hit me hard because I love her more than anything, and she's one of the best parts of my life. But social media is a different kind of public, and the idea of sharing our relationship with the world makes me anxious. I explained this to her, but she felt it wasn't a good enough reason. She said that visibility is important, that by being out, we can inspire others and support those struggling. I admire her strength, but I'm not sure I'm ready to take on that responsibility. She was quiet for a while after I explained my fears, but since then, it's been hanging over us like a cloud. Now, every time we're out together, I feel this pressure to capture it for the sake of sharing. I feel guilty when she tags me in photos, knowing I won't reciprocate. I worry that this difference might create a rift between us, especially since she's so open and proud. Am I being selfish for wanting to keep our relationship private? Or am I just not brave enough to stand by her side in the way she deserves? I'm at a loss, and I worry that I might be pushing her away because of my own fears. My 26 female, boyfriend, 30 male, doesn't believe in marriage, and it's starting to make me question our future. My boyfriend and I have been together for 4 years. We met through mutual friends, and he was everything I'd ever hoped for in a partner. Kind, thoughtful, and supportive. We've built a life together, living in a cute apartment with our dog, and I always thought we were on the same page. But about a year ago, I started to notice subtle hints that he might not be as interested in marriage as I was. I've always dreamed of getting married one day, not just for the wedding, but for the commitment it symbolizes. When I finally worked up the courage to bring it up, he didn't seem comfortable. He brushed it off with a joke, saying marriage was just a piece of paper and that it wouldn't change anything between us. At the time, I let it go, thinking he might come around if I gave him more time. As the months passed, though, it kept gnawing at me. Every time I saw a wedding announcement, every time friends asked about our future, I couldn't shake the feeling of longing for something more concrete. When I finally pressed him on it a few months ago, he was more direct. He admitted he didn't believe in marriage and didn't see it as part of his future. He said he was happy with our relationship as it was and didn't want things to change. It felt like a punch to the gut. I started questioning if our relationship was sustainable, knowing that one of my biggest dreams wasn't shared by the person I love most. He told me he'd support me in every other way, but he just couldn't get behind marriage. He grew up in a family where marriage didn't end well for anyone, and I think he's scared of repeating that cycle. Now, I'm caught in this internal battle. Part of me feels like I should be able to compromise after all. Isn't our love and commitment enough? But another part of me feels resentful and disappointed. I'm afraid that if I stay, I'll end up bitter, watching friends and family take those steps that I'll never have with him. But I'm also terrified of leaving someone I love so deeply, just because of a difference in opinion on marriage. Our relationship is on the line, and I'm scared that no matter what choice I make, I'll end up feeling like I lost something irreplaceable. My 29 female, husband, 31 male, says he wants kids someday, but I found out he's been secretly taking birth control. My husband and I have been married for 3 years, and we'd always talked about having kids one day. Both of us work demanding jobs, but I've been getting more serious about the idea of starting a family. When I brought it up recently, he said he wanted to wait a bit longer to feel more financially secure, but he reassured me that we were on the same page about kids eventually. However, last month, I started to feel suspicious because he's been extra careful during those times of the month, if you know what I mean. I brushed it off initially, thinking maybe he was just being responsible since we hadn't actually planned on trying yet. But then one day, I accidentally stumbled on something unexpected, a prescription box for male birth control pills tucked away in his gym bag. I was shocked. I didn't even know male birth control was something he was on, and it wasn't something he'd ever discussed with me. It felt like I'd been lied to for months, and maybe even manipulated into believing that we'd have a family someday when he had other plans. When I confronted him, he seemed panicked, but then admitted he'd been taking it because he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. He said he was afraid that telling me the truth would push me to leave, and he didn't want to lose me. Now, I'm torn between understanding his fears and feeling deeply betrayed. I want kids, and I thought he did too. But this deception, hiding his choice to take birth control, makes me question everything. Did he ever actually want kids? Or was he just saying what he thought I wanted to hear? I don't know if I can build a future with someone who might not be honest with me about something so important.
My 26M girlfriend, 25 farads, makes way more than me, and her family thinks I'm just using her. My girlfriend and I have been together for almost 2 years, and she's absolutely amazing. We have a solid relationship, and she's incredibly smart, driven, and successful in her career as a software engineer. She makes significantly more than I do, and it's something I've always admired about her because she's worked so hard to get where she is. I work in education, which is a job I love, but it doesn't pay nearly as much. I'm content with my career choice, but recently her family has started making comments about my income. It began subtly, like her dad jokingly asking if I'd consider a better paying job, but it's escalated to more direct, borderline insulting questions. Her mom even asked her once, right in front of me, if she was sure I wasn't just using her for money or a comfortable life. It was humiliating. I've tried to brush it off, but it's hard not to let it get to me. I feel like I constantly have to prove myself around them. I suggested that maybe I don't attend every family event to avoid these awkward situations, but my girlfriend insisted I shouldn't miss out because of them. She defends me when they make comments, but they never seem to stop. I love her deeply, and she's never made me feel less than because of my career. But the stress of feeling judged by her family is wearing me down. I don't want to force her to choose between me and her family, but I also don't know how to deal with the constant barrage of comments that imply I'm not good enough for her. I've never felt so conflicted about a relationship, and I'm afraid this could end up tearing us apart if we can't find a way to handle it.
My 28 female boyfriend's 30 male family is pushing him to propose, but he secretly told me he's not ready. I've been dating my boyfriend for 4 years, and we've had a steady, loving relationship. We both work stable jobs, recently moved in together, and share most of the same values. Naturally, our families started expecting a proposal, especially his family, who are pretty traditional. For the past year, they've been nudging him to settle down, dropping hints about rings, grandkids, and family expectations. A few months ago, his mom even pulled me aside and casually mentioned a family heirloom ring, insinuating it would look beautiful on me one day. I was flattered, and it got me thinking that maybe a proposal was closer than I thought. But recently, my boyfriend and I had a heart-to-heart where he admitted he's not sure he's ready for marriage. He said he loves me deeply and wants to be with me, but the pressure from his family is starting to feel overwhelming. He confessed he wasn't even sure if marriage was necessary for him and didn't want to rush into something he wasn't prepared for. Now, I feel caught in a complicated web. I love him, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. I'm worried about the possibility that we might never get to the next step that I've always dreamed of. His family has no idea he feels this way, and part of me wonders if they'd be hurt or even angry if they knew the truth. I don't want him to feel forced into something he doesn't want, but I also don't want to spend my life waiting for something that might never come. Each time his family brings up our future, I'm torn between my love for him and the ache of uncertainty about whether marriage is something we'll ever share.
My 24M best friend, 24M, started dating my ex, and I'm not sure our friendship can survive it. I've known my best friend, Matt, since high school, and we've always been like brothers. We went to the same college, share the same friend group, and have been there for each other through countless ups and downs. But recently, he started dating my ex-girlfriend, Emma. Emma and I dated for 3 years and broke up about a year ago. The breakup was mutual, but it still took me a long time to move on. Matt and Emma started seeing each other about 3 months ago, and I only found out by accident when I saw them together at a party. They were both apologetic, saying they didn't want to hurt me, but that they had fallen for each other and hoped I could understand. I told them I was fine with it, but honestly, it stung. Seeing them together, watching the person I love now with my best friend, feels like a punch to the gut. Matt keeps insisting he values our friendship and doesn't want this to change things between us, but I don't know if I can move past it. I feel betrayed and hurt, even though I know logically they didn't do anything wrong. I want to be happy for them, but seeing them together is a constant reminder of what I lost. Our friend group is aware, and I can sense the awkwardness when we're all together. I'm starting to distance myself, but it feels like I'm losing both my best friend and my ex at the same time. I'm caught in this cycle of resentment and sadness, and I'm not sure how to break free of it. Do I end the friendship and walk away, or do I try to bury my feelings and pretend that I'm okay with this new reality?
My 33 female boyfriend, 35 male, doesn't believe in marriage, and it's causing me to question our future. My boyfriend, Mark, and I have been together for 5 years. We've built a great life together, traveled, bought a home, and even adopted a dog. We're happy, stable, and I love him deeply. But there's one issue that's starting to weigh on me. Mark doesn't believe in marriage. He's always been upfront about it, saying he doesn't see the point and believes our commitment should be enough. I thought I could live with it, but as time goes on, I'm finding myself yearning for the official commitment and the sense of family that marriage brings. It doesn't help that friends and family constantly ask when we're getting married, and it hurts to explain that it's not on the table for us. Last week, I tried bringing it up, explaining how much marriage would mean to me. Mark said he understood my feelings, but reaffirmed that he's just not interested in the institution of marriage. He suggested that we could throw a commitment ceremony if I wanted something symbolic, but it didn't feel the same. I want the legal and social acknowledgement, the shared last name, and the lifelong promise that comes with marriage. Now I'm torn. I feel guilty for wanting to change his mind on something he's been honest about from the start, but I also can't shake the feeling that I'll be missing out on something deeply important to me. I'm scared that if I stay, I'll always feel a bit resentful and unfulfilled. But the idea of leaving him just because he doesn't want to get married feels drastic and heartbreaking.
My 28 male girlfriend's 27 female mother is involved in every aspect of her life, and it's affecting our relationship. I've been with my girlfriend, Rachel, for 3 years now, and I'm convinced she's the one for me. She's kind, intelligent, and we have a deep connection. But there's one major obstacle in our relationship. Her mother, Diane. Diane has always been very involved in Rachel's life, but as our relationship has grown, her presence has become overwhelming. Diane is constantly calling or texting Rachel, even late at night, to discuss everything from Rachel's work to our plans for the future. If we're planning a vacation, Diane will have her own input, and Rachel will actually take her advice over mine. Diane even has a key to Rachel's apartment and stops by unannounced, often without warning me. I've tried talking to Rachel about setting boundaries, but she brushes it off, saying that her mom has always been like this and that it's not a big deal. Recently, things came to a head when Diane made a comment about how young people don't know how to keep relationships strong, implying that our relationship issues were somehow my fault. I was livid, but Rachel insisted her mom didn't mean anything by it. I feel like I'm competing with her mother for a place in her life, and it's exhausting. I want to be with Rachel, but I also want to feel like I'm a priority and not second place to Diane's expectations and demands. I'm struggling with whether I can keep fighting for this relationship or if it's always going to be a three-person dynamic.
My 29 female sister, 35 female, wants me to be her surrogate, but I'm not sure I can do it. My sister, Erin, and I have always been close. She's older than me by 6 years and has been like a second mother growing up, especially since our parents were often busy with work. Erin and her husband have been trying to have a baby for several years now, but after multiple failed IVF attempts, they were told by their doctor that it's unlikely she can carry a child to term. She was heartbroken, and seeing her go through the emotional roller coaster of IVF was painful. But recently, Erin asked me for something I never expected. She wants me to be her surrogate. The idea of helping my sister fulfill her dream of becoming a mother is incredibly moving, and part of me feels honored that she would trust me with something so important. However, the thought of actually carrying her baby is daunting. I'm not sure I'm prepared for the physical toll, not to mention the emotional complexities of carrying a child that I'll give to someone else at birth. I also worry about the impact on my relationship with my own boyfriend, who's supportive but unsure about how it would affect us as a couple. Erin has assured me that she'll cover any medical expenses and be by my side every step of the way, but I still feel conflicted. I want to help my sister, and I can't bear the thought of her heartbreak if I say no. But at the same time, I wonder if I'll be able to handle the weight of this decision and how it might change my life forever. I feel stuck between my love for my sister and my own uncertainty, unsure of what to do. My 32 female husband's 34M career change has turned him into a different person, and I'm struggling to keep up. My husband, Josh, and I have been together for 8 years, married for 4. When we first met, he was working in finance, a stable, if demanding career that aligned with our plans for the future. But over the past year, he decided he wanted to pursue his passion for personal fitness and leave finance altogether. At first, I was supportive. I understood how grueling his job could be, and it made sense that he wanted something more fulfilling. But since making this change, Josh has become someone I barely recognize. He's completely transformed his lifestyle. He spends hours at the gym, meal preps obsessively, and spends our savings on personal training certifications and courses. His enthusiasm for fitness is almost contagious, but it's like he's abandoned every other part of his life, including me. We used to have date nights and weekends away, but now he's always focused on his fitness journey. When I bring it up, he brushes it off, saying it's for our future, and that he wants to build a successful business. But the more he changes, the more I feel isolated and left behind. I tried joining him in the gym to find common ground, but he's so serious about it that I feel out of place and self-conscious. Every time I mention going out or doing something unrelated to fitness, he's uninterested. I love Josh, and I want to support his dreams, but I feel like I'm losing my husband to his new passion. I worry that if I confront him too directly, he'll see it as a lack of support and that I'm not on his team. But I don't know how long I can keep up this new life he's built without feeling completely neglected and left out.
My 27M long-distance girlfriend, 26 female, wants me to move, but I'm not ready to give up my life here. I've been in a long-distance relationship with Chloe for 2 years. We met during a conference, and despite the distance, we've made it work. We visit each other every few months, talk daily, and even take vacations together. However, Chloe recently expressed that she's tired of the distance and wants us to live in the same city. She proposed that I move to her city, which is halfway across the country, as she has a stable job there. I can understand her perspective, but I'm not sure I'm ready to uproot my life. I have a job I love, close friends, and family nearby. While I love Chloe, the idea of leaving everything behind is daunting. I suggested she consider moving here, but she's firmly rooted in her city due to her career and her family connections. We've started having more intense conversations, and she hinted that she's at a point in life where she wants to settle down and have a future together. I don't want to lose her, but I also don't know if I'm ready to make such a big sacrifice. Now I'm worried that we might be approaching an ultimatum, and I don't know how to move forward without one of us feeling compromised. I, 26M, started a business with my best friend of 10 years, and it ruined everything. So here's something I never thought I'd be writing about on Reddit, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. I'm 26M, and I've had this friend, Mike, 28M, for over a decade. We met in high school, bonded over video games, mutual love of horror movies, and generally not fitting into the mainstream crowd. Mike's the type of friend who's always been a bit intense but fiercely loyal. Like the guy who'd drive across town to pick you up at 3am if you needed him. But recently, things have gotten strange, to say the least. About 3 months ago, Mike came to me with an idea. He wanted to start a small business together, like an online store selling vintage vinyl records and movie memorabilia. At first, I was hesitant. I've got a stable, if boring, job, and taking on something new sounded risky. But he was so passionate about it, and honestly, it felt good to see him that excited. He's had a rough year, lost his job, went through a messy breakup, and was generally struggling to find direction. So I thought, why not? A small project could be fun, and who knows, maybe we'd make some extra cash. The first few weeks went pretty well. We scoured eBay and local flea markets, searching for rare records and old movie posters to add to our inventory. We'd spend hours setting up the website, brainstorming marketing ideas, and pricing everything out. I hadn't seen him this happy in ages, and it felt good to be part of something positive for him. But then one night while we were out grabbing drinks, Mike dropped a bombshell. He told me he was in debt. Not just a little, but like deep in debt, credit cards maxed out, loans piling up, and a few missed payments that were turning into collections calls. I was shocked. Mike had never mentioned this before. He'd always been the kind of guy who seemed to live comfortably, even on a modest income. I asked him why he hadn't told me sooner, and he just shrugged, saying he didn't want to burden me. This was the first moment I felt uneasy. Here we were, starting a business together, and I was only now learning he was drowning in debt? But I pushed those thoughts aside. He was my friend, and friends help each other out, right? Fast forward to a month later, and things started to get complicated. Orders were coming in slowly, and we weren't making much money. But instead of slowing down on purchases, Mike was spending more and more on inventory. Expensive items, too, like rare vinyl records that cost hundreds. When I asked him about it, he'd assure me that you've got to spend money to make money. At first, I bought into it, thinking maybe he was right. But as the costs kept adding up, I started to feel anxious. One night, after another business meeting that ended up with Mike buying 3 high-end records we couldn't afford, I decided to log into our business account to see exactly where we stood. And that's when I found it. A huge transfer of funds, $3,000 to be exact, from our business account to his personal one. I felt my stomach drop. I texted him asking if he'd made a mistake, if maybe he'd meant to move the money somewhere else. He replied quickly, saying he'd borrowed it to cover a personal emergency and would pay it back soon. When I asked what the emergency was, he dodged the question, saying it was personal and to just trust him. This wasn't like him. Sure, Mike could be impulsive, but he'd never kept secrets from me before. I told him we needed to talk about it, and he reluctantly agreed to meet up the next day. When we sat down to talk, he was defensive from the get-go. He insisted he'd pay me back, swearing he just needed a little more time. But the more I pushed, the more he started lashing out. He accused me of not trusting him, saying I didn't understand the pressure he was under. That's when he let it slip. His debt wasn't just from credit cards. He owed money to some less than legal lenders. My head was spinning. I asked him why he hadn't come clean sooner, why he dragged me into this mess if he knew things were this bad. And his response? You wouldn't understand. You've always had it easy. That hit me hard. I'd always considered us equals, two guys navigating life with similar backgrounds. But apparently he saw things differently. He went on a tirade about how I'd never struggled the way he had, how my perfect family and steady job made it impossible for me to understand his life. I walked away that night feeling like I didn't even know him. This person, who'd been my closest friend for over a decade, was turning into a stranger right before my eyes. For the next week, I kept my distance, trying to process everything. I still felt a sense of loyalty to him, but I couldn't ignore the betrayal. Then one day, I got a message from a mutual friend who asked if everything was okay between Mike and me. Apparently, Mike had been talking to people about how controlling I was, how I didn't let him have a say in the business, and how I was constantly judging him. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Not only had he lied and taken money without asking, but now he was turning our friends against me. A few days later, I confronted him again, asking him to meet me in person one last time. I told him I was done, that I couldn't keep going with the business if he was going to keep lying. Instead of apologizing, he laughed, saying, "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" He went on, listing every perceived slight over the years, every time he'd felt like I was holding him back or belittling him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Finally, I just told him that this friendship was over. I walked away, leaving behind a decade of shared memories, inside jokes, and all the good times we'd had. Losing a friend feels like mourning someone who's still alive. It's been weeks since we spoke, and every day I go back and forth between anger and heartbreak. I don't know if he'll ever pay back the money, and at this point, I don't even care. What hurts more is realizing that maybe the person I thought I knew never existed. After I ended things, I found out from some friends that Mike had been lying to more people than just me. He'd borrowed money from other mutual friends, always with some story about a personal emergency or a business opportunity, and apparently I was just the latest in a long line. It's like he had this whole other life none of us knew about. In the end, I feel like I lost a part of myself along with him. I've been rethinking everything, questioning my judgment, wondering if I should have seen this coming. It's made me more cautious, less trusting, and a lot more guarded. But it also taught me that sometimes you have to let go even when it feels like tearing out a piece of your own heart. I still see Mike's posts on social media, usually talking about some new venture he's starting or bragging about an amazing business deal. And I wonder if he'll ever stop running from himself, or if he'll just keep burning bridges one friend at a time.
Finding My Path, a Muslim woman's journey of faith, family, and freedom. Hi, everyone. Sharing this feels personal, but I've seen how stories on here can bring people together. I'm a 32-year-old Muslim woman, born and raised in a small, close-knit community, and my life has been a journey of balancing family expectations, my faith, and my own dreams. I hope my story can be a window into a world some may not know much about and might resonate with others in similar situations. Growing up, I was always the good girl. In our culture, there's a lot of emphasis on family honor, modesty, and respect for tradition. My parents, immigrants from a small town, had high hopes for their children. They worked tirelessly, often 2 jobs, to give us opportunities they never had. I saw their sacrifices, and from a young age, I wanted to make them proud. Being the eldest daughter, there was a lot on my shoulders. In our household, I was a second mom to my younger siblings, helping with homework, chores, and even cooking for the family. My parents instilled in me a strong sense of duty, but I also felt like my life was somehow predetermined. It wasn't that I resented it. I loved my family dearly, but I had this constant question in the back of my mind. Who was I, really? Beyond the dutiful daughter, the perfect student, the quiet, modest girl, who was I? School became my escape. I loved learning and did well academically, which my parents encouraged. But as I grew older, their focus shifted toward preparing me for marriage. There were subtle hints at first comments about how I should learn to cook certain dishes or be more responsible. because one day my own family would need me. I felt torn. On one hand, I wanted to honor my parents and follow the path laid out for me. But on the other, I had dreams that went beyond what was expected of me. I wanted to see the world, to learn about different cultures, to build a career. Yet, I kept those desires hidden, afraid they might be seen as selfish or rebellious. When I was 19, my parents began arranging meetings with potential suitors. In our culture, arranged introductions are common, and while it's not always forced, there's a strong pressure to agree with the family's choice. Each meeting felt like a performance. I would dress modestly, put on a polite smile, and answer questions about my cooking skills, family values, and religious observance. Each time, I felt like I was playing a role, hiding my true self. I remember one young man in particular. He was respectful, educated, and came from a good family. My parents were thrilled. But during our conversation, I realized we had vastly different visions for life. He expected a traditional wife, one who would stay home and take care of the household. When I mentioned my interest in pursuing further studies, he looked uncomfortable, as though that was out of place for a woman. That was the moment I knew that path wasn't for me, though I didn't yet have the courage to voice it. As time passed, I started feeling more disconnected from my own culture, but I couldn't openly admit it. I felt trapped between two worlds, my heritage and my desire to explore life outside its confines. Then, during my second year at university, I met a group of friends from different backgrounds who became like family to me. They challenged my worldview, encouraged me to question things, and, most importantly, respected me for who I was. They showed me that it was okay to want more from life, and that my dreams didn't make me any less respectful or loving toward my family. My parents weren't pleased with my newfound independence. They wanted me to come home right after classes to avoid mixing with people who didn't share our values. Our arguments escalated, but I couldn't let go of the sense of freedom I'd found. One day, after a particularly heated argument, my mom said, "You're forgetting who you are, forgetting where you come from." Her words stung, and I was torn. Part of me wondered if she was right, if I was being selfish, abandoning everything my parents had sacrificed for me. But another part of me knew that I had to forge my own path if I wanted to be truly happy. After university, I got a job offer in another city. It was a huge opportunity and entry-level position in a field I loved, with the chance for advancement. I was ecstatic, but when I told my parents, they were devastated. My father asked why I wanted to leave them, why I couldn't just find a job closer to home and settle down. For them, my choice felt like a betrayal. They saw it as me rejecting the values they'd instilled in me. Despite their objections, I took the job. Moving to a new city was exhilarating and terrifying. I was finally on my own, navigating life without my family's watchful eyes. I struggled, made mistakes, and faced moments of loneliness, but I was learning and growing in ways I never could have back home. Over time, my relationship with my family became strained. They saw my independence as defiance, as though I'd chosen a life that went against everything they believed. Phone calls with my mom often ended in tears, and my father grew distant, hurt by what he perceived as my abandonment. I struggled with guilt, constantly questioning if I'd made the right choice. Was my happiness worth the price of my family's disappointment? Then, 2 years ago, my mother called me with devastating news. My father had been diagnosed with a severe illness. In that moment, everything else faded away. I took leave from work and returned home, wanting to be there for my family. The illness brought us closer again, and for the first time in years, we began to communicate openly. My father, weakened but still proud, finally told me he respected my choices, even if he didn't understand them. "You're braver than I ever was," he admitted, with a look I hadn't seen before. I knew how hard those words were for him, and it was the validation I'd been longing for my entire life. As my father's health declined, I found myself balancing work, family obligations, and my own aspirations. But something had shifted within me. I no longer felt the need to justify my choices. I realized that my journey was about finding harmony between my heritage and my dreams, honoring my family while staying true to myself. Over the last year, I've been able to mend the rift with my family, little by little. My father passed away 6 months ago, and while the loss is still fresh, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. He taught me resilience, perseverance, and the importance of family, even when we don't see eye to eye. I've decided to start a community program for young women in similar situations, those who feel torn between their cultural expectations and their own desires. I want to give them the support I wished I'd had when I was younger, to show them that it's possible to honor your family and heritage while forging your own path. My life isn't perfect, and I still face challenges, but I've found a sense of peace. My faith has grown stronger as I've learned to embrace it in my own way, and I've come to realize that the true essence of my religion lies in compassion, understanding, and love values that transcend any cultural or societal boundaries. Today, I'm more confident in who I am: a Muslim woman, a daughter, a professional, and someone who's unafraid to pursue her dreams. I no longer feel the need to conform to a predefined role. Instead, I've embraced the complexity of my identity, understanding that I am more than any one label. For those of you reading this who may feel trapped, conflicted, or uncertain about your path, know that it's okay to take your time. It's okay to explore, to make mistakes, and to learn who you truly are. Your journey may look different from mine, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that authenticity, kindness, and self-respect are the true measures of success. Thank you for listening, Reddit family. Sharing this has been cathartic, and I hope my story brings comfort or inspiration to someone out there. May we all find the strength to walk our paths with integrity, courage, and compassion.
From rock bottom to redemption, how I, 29M, turned my life around against all odds. Alright, Reddit family, it's time I finally tell my story. I'll warn you now, this is long, but it's something I've been wanting to share because maybe, just maybe, it'll help someone who's feeling hopeless. So here goes, the journey from my lowest point to a life I never thought possible. I'm 29M, and just 3 years ago, I was about as low as you can get. I had no job, no real friends, a strained relationship with my family, and an apartment that I could barely afford to keep. My life felt like a series of unfortunate events and bad decisions that just kept piling up. The thing is, none of this happened overnight. It was a gradual slide into darkness that started in my early 20s right after I dropped out of college. College was supposed to be my big break. I'd grown up in a small town, the first in my family to even go to college, and my parents were so proud. But I didn't have the direction or discipline to stick with it. I ended up partying too hard, falling behind, and eventually dropping out with nothing to show for it, but a pile of student debt and a heart full of shame. That shame kept me from reaching out for help. I convinced myself that I was the family's black sheep, and I withdrew from everyone. For the next few years, I hopped from one low-paying job to another. I worked as a waiter, a cashier, even tried telemarketing. Nothing stuck. Every time something went wrong, I'd use it as an excuse to quit. I was unreliable, constantly late, and blaming everyone but myself for my failures. I thought I'd hit rock bottom, but I had no idea how far I still had to fall. In 2019, I lost the only job that was keeping me afloat. It was a seasonal gig, and I was counting on it turning into a full-time position. When that didn't happen, I couldn't pay my bills. My credit tanked, and I was evicted from my apartment. My friends, well, the few I had left, started to pull away because, frankly, I was a downer to be around. I'd become that person who was always complaining, always blaming the world for my problems. I ended up moving back to my hometown, feeling like a complete failure. My parents, bless them, took me back in, even though I could tell they were disappointed. They tried to encourage me to find a job, but I'd become so used to failure that I didn't even bother trying. I'd spend most days holed up in my old room, scrolling mindlessly through social media, envying people who seemed to have it all together. Depression hit hard. There were days when I didn't see the point of even getting out of bed. Then, one night, I stumbled upon a video about a guy who had turned his life around. He talked about how he'd been in a similar situation, jobless, broke, feeling like his life was going nowhere, and managed to make something of himself. He said the turning point for him was realizing that no one was coming to save him, that he was the only person responsible for changing his life. Something about that hit me right in the gut. I realized I'd been waiting for some magical solution, a sign that things would get better. But there was no sign coming. I was either going to keep sinking or finally start swimming. I started small. I knew I wasn't in any mental or physical shape to dive into anything major right away. So I began by focusing on my health. I got up at a decent hour every day and went for a walk around the neighborhood. At first, it felt pointless, just another thing to add to my list of failed attempts. But after a couple of weeks, I noticed I had more energy and my mood was slightly better. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't completely miserable either. It was a start. Next, I tackled my diet. I'd been living off junk food for years, and it showed. I started cooking simple meals at home, learning recipes from YouTube. It was slow progress, but within a couple of months, I lost a few pounds and felt more in control. My parents even noticed and commented that I seemed brighter, like I had a little spark back. That small bit of encouragement pushed me to keep going. After a few months of focusing on my health, I felt ready to tackle the bigger stuff. I knew I needed a job, but I didn't want to go back to the dead-end gigs that had brought me so much misery. So I looked into what I really wanted to do. As a kid, I'd always loved tech and computers. I'd even taught myself basic coding in high school, but that dream had been buried under years of bad decisions. Now I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I could still make it happen. I started taking free coding classes online. It was hard, especially since I'd been out of any sort of structured learning for years, but I stuck with it. I set small, manageable goals, like completing one lesson each day. Some days I felt stupid and out of my depth. But I'd remind myself of that guy in the video, the one who'd said that persistence is key, and I kept pushing forward. By the end of that year, I'd completed several courses and was feeling pretty confident. I started applying for entry-level tech jobs. The rejections came fast and hard, but this time I didn't let it break me. I kept learning, kept applying, kept improving my skills. And then, finally, I landed an internship at a small tech startup. The pay was low, but I didn't care. I was getting a foot in the door, and that's all that mattered. The internship was a turning point. For the first time in years, I had a reason to get up in the morning. I poured myself into the work, eager to prove myself. I stayed late, asked questions, and tried to soak up as much knowledge as I could. My supervisor noticed my enthusiasm and started giving me more responsibilities. After 6 months, they offered me a full-time position. I remember calling my parents that night, telling them I'd finally landed a real job. They cried, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was worth something. My relationship with them had been strained for years, but I could tell they were proud of me. That feeling became a new source of motivation. I wanted to keep making them proud, to prove to myself that I could be someone worth respecting. Since then, things have only gotten better. I continued to work hard, and after a year, I was promoted. I moved out of my parents' place and into my own apartment, a modest one, but mine nonetheless. I've reconnected with some old friends, and I've even started dating again. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually living, not just existing. But the best part? Last month, I paid off the last of my student debt. That weight I'd been carrying for years was finally lifted. I'm not rich, and I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm proud of how far I've come. I've learned that success isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's about constantly improving, setting goals, and not letting setbacks define you. So here I am, Reddit, sharing my story with all of you. I know what it's like to feel hopeless, to think you're destined to fail. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you're never truly stuck. Change is possible, no matter how far gone you think you are. You just have to be willing to start small, to take that first step, and keep going even when it feels pointless. Today, I'm building a life I'm proud of. I'm not a success story in the traditional sense, but I'm a success in my own eyes. And if I can do it, so can you.
My mom, 55 female, lied to me, 26M, about my father my whole life. And I only found out after he died. This is something I've been struggling with for the last 6 months, and I don't know how to deal with it. I, 26M, was raised by my mom as a single parent. Growing up, I didn't know much about my dad, only that he wasn't a good person, according to her. She always told me he wasn't interested in being a father and had abandoned us when I was a baby. A few years ago, I started to get curious and asked if I could know more about him. She'd always shut it down, saying it was better for me not to know. So I didn't push. But earlier this year, I got a message from a woman who claimed to be my aunt. She said my father had recently passed away and that the family wanted to reach out to me. They'd been looking for me for years. I was shocked. I called my mom, hoping she could explain, and she reluctantly admitted she'd kept me from him. She said that after their divorce, he fought to stay in my life, but she didn't want me to grow up with a negative influence. She even had custody arrangements to ensure he'd never see me. She told me she did it to protect me, but it felt like my entire life had been based on a lie. I ended up meeting my father's family, and they told me about the man he really was. By all accounts, he was loving, hardworking, and desperate to have a relationship with me. He tried reaching out over the years, sending letters and gifts that my mom had apparently intercepted. I missed out on knowing him, on having a father, all because of choices I never got to make. I'm trying to rebuild a relationship with his family now, but the pain and resentment toward my mom are overwhelming. I can't look at her the same way, knowing she deprived me of something so important. I feel like I've lost my father twice, first in life and then in death, and now I'm not sure how to even begin to forgive her.
My 30M best friend, 31M, ghosted me after 15 years of friendship, and I can't move on. Alright, so I'm not sure if this even belongs here, but I have to get this off my chest. I, 30M, have had a best friend, Jake, 31M, since high school. We went through everything together: breakups, family drama, starting our careers, you name it. Jake was my brother in every way but blood, and it felt like we'd be close forever. About a year ago, Jake met this girl, Emily. At first, I was happy for him. He'd been single for a while, and she seemed great. But as their relationship got serious, things changed. He became distant, stopped replying to messages, and started canceling plans. I figured he was just in the honeymoon phase and that he'd come around. Then one day, he just stopped responding. No explanation, no goodbye. I called, texted, even went by his place, but he wouldn't answer. Mutual friends were just as confused. They hadn't heard from him either, and no one seemed to know what was going on. I started to wonder if I'd done something wrong or if there was some issue he never shared with me. Weeks turned into months, and I was left to fill in the blanks. I kept reliving every conversation, every shared memory, trying to figure out what went wrong. It was like losing a family member, but without closure or answers. Eventually, I learned through mutual friends that he was fine, still dating Emily, and had apparently moved on with his life. I don't understand how he could just erase me after so many years. We were more than friends, we were brothers. It's been over a year now, and I still think about him almost every day. I've tried to move on, tried to make new friends, but it's like there's this empty space that no one else can fill. I keep hoping he'll reach out one day and explain, but deep down I know he won't. And that's what hurts the most. Hey Reddit, throwaway account because, well, this is one of those deeply personal things. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and last month I stumbled on something that completely changed the way I see my family. I'm still trying to make sense of it, and I don't know where else to turn. So here goes. My dad was my hero growing up. He was always there, from coaching my soccer games to being that goofy, supportive dad everyone loved. He worked hard, harder than anyone I knew, to give us a comfortable life. He was my role model in every way. My mom, on the other hand, was more private. She was always kind, but she had this air of mystery about her, like there were parts of her life she didn't want us to see. I chalked it up to personality differences and never thought much of it. A month ago, I was cleaning out my mom's attic as she prepared to downsize and move closer to me and my sister. Among boxes of old photos and documents, I found a locked wooden box labeled "For my kids." My mom was out shopping, and curiosity got the better of me. I broke open the lock and found letters inside. Letters addressed to me and my sister Dot from my biological father. Turns out my dad wasn't my biological father. My real father passed away before I was born. My mom met my dad, the one who raised me, when I was a toddler, and he adopted me. He knew, obviously, but they'd agreed to keep it a secret. It was surreal reading my real father's words. He wrote about his dreams for me, his love for me and my mom, and how he wished he could be there to see me grow up. I felt this strange connection to someone I'd never met. I confronted my mom later that day. She broke down in tears, saying she'd always wanted to tell me, but didn't know how. My dad had been my dad in every sense of the word, and she didn't want to risk changing that bond. She was terrified I'd resent her for hiding the truth. Now I'm left in this whirlwind of emotions. I don't feel any less love for my dad, the man who raised me, but I also feel this pull toward the memory of the father I never knew. I started visiting his grave and learning about him from my mom. It's like I'm getting to know a part of myself that was hidden for so long. I'm still processing everything. My family isn't what I thought it was, but somehow I feel like I've gained something too. This journey has been difficult, but it's brought me closer to my mom, and it's given me a new perspective on family. Blood doesn't define us. The love we give and receive does. This is one wild ride, so buckle up. I'm a 34-year-old woman, and 6 months ago my sister, 29 female, showed up at my doorstep in the middle of the night with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. She'd left her husband after 5 years of what I thought was a happy marriage. I'm sharing this here because the whole experience has changed both of us in ways I never saw coming. A little backstory. My sister and I grew up super close, but when she got married, we drifted. Her husband was, let's just say, not a fan of family involvement. He isolated her bit by bit, always under the guise of protecting their relationship. We saw less and less of her, and when she did come around, she seemed quieter, like she'd lost some of that spark that made her her. So when she showed up at my apartment that night, soaked from the rain and visibly shaken, I knew things were worse than I'd realized. She wouldn't give me details at first, just said she needed a place to crash for a while. I wasn't going to push her, I was just glad she'd finally reached out. I made up the guest room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we spent a whole night talking like we used to when we were kids. It took weeks for her to open up fully. Little by little, she shared what she'd been going through: years of manipulation, control, and emotional abuse. He'd isolated her from friends and family, convinced her she wasn't capable of making decisions, even controlled her finances. It was heartbreaking to hear. I felt angry, helpless, and guilty for not seeing it sooner. Living together, we began rebuilding our relationship. I watched her start to come alive again, to regain her independence and confidence. She got a job at a local coffee shop, reconnected with old friends, and even started therapy. It was incredible to see her strength emerge, bit by bit. In helping her find her feet, I ended up finding myself too. I'd been coasting through life, focused on my career but ignoring my own needs. Watching her fight to reclaim her life inspired me to do the same. I left a toxic job, took a chance on a new opportunity, and finally started doing things I loved again: traveling, painting, even dating. 6 months later, my sister is a new person, and honestly, so am I. We've become each other's rock, and I've learned just how resilient and inspiring she is. Family isn't always easy, and sometimes you lose your way, but finding it again together is one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced. Thank you for reading, Reddit. We're both still healing, but we're doing it together. Hey Reddit, this has been weighing on me for a while, and I don't know where else to share it. I'm a 26-year-old guy who recently took a DNA test for fun. It was one of those discounted kits, and honestly, I wasn't expecting much, just thought it'd be cool to learn about my ancestry and maybe confirm that I'm as Irish as my mom always says. What I found, though, wasn't just surprising, it shook me to my core. I sent in my DNA sample, and about 6 weeks later, I got an email saying my results were ready. I excitedly logged in and, for the first few minutes, had a blast reading through the details of my genetic background. But then I noticed a list labeled DNA relatives, and right at the top was a match labeled as a half-sibling. My stomach dropped. Here's some background. I grew up with my mom and dad, and they've been together since college. I was always told I was an only child, and we're a pretty tight-knit family. The idea of a half-sibling had never even crossed my mind. Thinking it had to be some kind of glitch, I clicked on the profile, only to see that this half-sibling shared enough DNA with me that there was no doubt we were related. They even had a profile photo, a woman who looked like she could be my older sister, with similar eyes and even the same dimple on her left cheek. I was in shock. For days, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to bring it up to my parents because I didn't even know if they were aware. After a week of sleepless nights, I decided to message her. I kept it simple, just introducing myself and saying that according to the DNA test, we might be related. She responded right away, saying she had been waiting to hear from me. In her response, she confirmed that she knew she was adopted and had always wondered about her biological family. She had been searching for years, but had never been able to find any leads until she took the same DNA test. It was a weird feeling talking to someone who was, genetically speaking, my sister, but a complete stranger otherwise. She was as curious as I was to learn the truth. After a lot of internal struggle, I decided to confront my mom. One evening, I sat her down, showed her the DNA results, and asked her if there was something I should know. Her face turned white, and she looked as though the ground had just fallen out from under her. She started to tear up and told me a story I never could have imagined. Before she met my dad, she was in a relationship with another man. She got pregnant unexpectedly, and at the time, she wasn't in a place to raise a child. She ended up making the difficult decision to give the baby up for adoption. Not long after, she met my dad and they started a life together. She said she'd kept it a secret all these years out of shame and fear of how I might react. She never thought this part of her life would ever resurface. I was speechless. I had so many emotions running through me: anger, sadness, and even empathy. Part of me understood that my mom was young and probably terrified, but I also couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I couldn't believe she'd hidden this from me for so long. After a long conversation, she agreed to meet my half-sister. That meeting was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. My mom, my half-sister, and I met at a small cafe. The resemblance between them was uncanny, and seeing them interact was like watching two sides of a mirror, one reflecting the past, the other the present. There were a lot of tears, a lot of laughter, and even some healing. My mom apologized to her, and they talked for hours about everything from family traditions to what it was like growing up in separate worlds. Since then, we've been slowly building a relationship. It's not always easy, and there are days when I'm still angry and confused. But having my half-sister in my life has taught me so much about forgiveness, resilience, and the complicated nature of family. In a strange way, this experience has brought us closer. Family is messy, Reddit, but sometimes those messes help us find a kind of truth we didn't even know we needed.
I feel like I need to put it out there. I'm 39 now, but this happened when I was 25, working as a paramedic in a big city. My job exposed me to a lot of dark things, and as a result, I was pretty cynical about life and death. But one night on the job changed my perspective in ways I'm still grappling with. It was a freezing winter evening, and my partner and I got a call about a serious accident involving a car and a motorcycle. We rushed to the scene, prepared for the worst. When we arrived, it was chaos, flashing lights, police trying to control traffic, and people standing around in shock. The motorcyclist, a young guy, couldn't have been older than 21. He was lying on the road, barely breathing, with severe injuries. I knew immediately that his chances were slim. As we were stabilizing him to transport him to the hospital, I felt this strange pull, like something in me was urging me to do more. I know it sounds odd, but it felt like an almost divine push. I put all my training, focus, and energy into keeping him alive, doing everything I could. The ride to the hospital was a blur of CPR, emergency interventions, and prayers. It was one of the longest rides of my life. When we finally got him to the hospital, the doctors took over. My partner and I waited outside, exhausted and fully expecting to hear the worst. But after what felt like an eternity, a doctor came out with an astonished look on his face. Against all odds, the young man had made it. His vitals were stabilizing, and he was going to be put into intensive care. I couldn't believe it. It was like witnessing a miracle in real time. I didn't think much about it afterward. As paramedics, we don't often see the people we help again. Our job is to get them to the hospital alive. And that's usually where our story ends. But about a year later, I was off duty and visiting a friend who was hosting a small gathering. That's when I saw him, the motorcyclist, standing there, looking healthy and full of life. It took me a moment to process, and then our eyes met. He came over, thanked me, and told me he was aware that he'd been saved against impossible odds. The more he talked, the more it hit me how connected we were in that moment of near death. He told me that during his recovery, he had a profound sense of purpose, like he was meant to be alive. Since then, he'd gone back to school, started volunteering, and was planning to dedicate his life to helping others. He said he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been saved for a reason. And meeting me, the person who had helped him through that night, felt like part of the purpose he'd been searching for. After that night, my life felt different. It was like a veil of cynicism had been lifted, and I started to see my work, my life, and even the people around me with a renewed sense of appreciation. I still don't know if I believe in miracles, but I believe in purpose. That young man gave me a reason to keep going, to find meaning in my work, and to keep pushing forward, even on the darkest days.
My 31 male wife's 30 female parents expect us to move back to their hometown, but I'm happy here. My wife, Megan, and I have built a life we love in the city. We both have stable jobs, a great apartment, and friends we adore. However, her parents, who live in a small town a few hours away, have been not so subtly hinting that they'd like us to move back. Megan was very close to her family growing up, and I understand why she feels torn, especially since her parents are getting older and could use help. Recently, Megan started entertaining the idea of moving back, but I'm honestly against it. The town is small, job opportunities are limited, and I would have to leave a career I love. I tried to explain to her how important my job and our current life are to me, but she thinks I'm being inflexible. She argued that moving wouldn't be forever and that we could always move back to the city once her parents are more stable. This conversation has put a strain on our relationship, with her feeling like I'm prioritizing my career over family. I love Megan and want to support her, but I'm afraid if we move, I'll end up feeling resentful. I don't want to come between her and her family, but I also don't want to give up a life that we worked so hard to build. It feels like a no-win situation, and I'm struggling to find a compromise that works for both of us.